There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a roulette table when a gambler keeps guessing right. It isn't loud or dramatic, just a thinning of the air, the kind that makes a room feel smaller than it was 5 minutes ago. The dealers grow careful with their hands. The pit boss lingers half a step longer than usual. Even the wheel seems to spin with a touch of suspicion. And suspicion in a casino is far more dangerous than losing. In the 1960s, across the polished casinos of Europe, that silence began following a thin, soft-spoken medical doctor who carried himself like a man waiting for test results and expecting to be right about them. His name was Richard Jarecki. He never chased luck or even hoped for black or red when the roulette wheel spun. Instead, he sat there, patiently listening, waiting for the echo of the spinning ball to mutter to him the slightest of hints, like a country doctor pressing a stethoscope to a stubborn chest. And what he heard inside those roulette wheels, in Monte Carlo, in San Remo, in quiet rooms where fortunes had vanished for decades, was something the house insisted did not exist. An imperfection, a flaw in the heartbeat. Now, most men who sit at a roulette table are hoping for mercy. Richard Jarecki came looking for weakness, and for a time, he found it. Because the truth is, roulette is supposed to be perfect, balanced, untouchable, sacred in its randomness. The felt looks innocent enough, and in the middle of it all, that wheel turns like it always has, patient, indifferent, perfectly content to take your money without so much as a thank you. It'll smile at you while it does it too. But sacred things, if you stare at them long enough, tend to reveal the smallest cracks. And Richard Jarecki had the patience to stare. Here's the story of how he hunted imperfect roulette wheels across the continent. For a man known for outwitting fortune, Jarecki didn't have the luckiest upbringing. He was born in Germany in 1931 to a Jewish family, which in that particular decade was about as safe as carrying matches through a fireworks factory. Still, he was a smart kid who later became a medical doctor trained in Heidelberg, a specialist in internal medicine, the kind of fellow who understood how small flaws in the human body could change a life, the sort of mind that notices when something's half a degree off. When the war crept too close, his family left for the United States, New Jersey of all places, from Europe's gathering darkness to suburban lawns and diner coffee, from marching boots to jukeboxes. America shaped him, but Europe called him back. And Europe, as it turns out, had unfinished business waiting under crystal chandeliers. By the time he was a young doctor, he had two things that rarely traveled together: a medical degree and a gambler's curiosity. And curiosity, if you're not careful, will walk you straight into trouble wearing polished shoes. Bless its heart. Sometimes it even buys the ticket to Monte Carlo. The casinos of Monte Carlo and San Remo weren't built for dreamers. They were built for inheritance. Marble floors, quiet dealers, high ceilings that made your losses feel small in comparison to the architecture. The wheel sat there like a monarch, and most men approached it like peasants, caps in hand, hoping for a nod. Richard did not. He had his own plan, a system, if you will, though he never called it that out loud. Now, there's a peculiar habit among people who study systems. They don't see chaos the same way the rest of us do. Where you or I might see randomness, they see patterns trying to whisper. Jarecki had the slimmest of notions that the game of roulette may not be perfectly random. Not in theory. The theory was clean. Balanced wheel, equal pockets, physics behaving itself. But theory lives in textbooks. Casinos live in the real world. And the real world, well, it wears down around the edges. Wood swells. Metal settles. Human hands tighten bolts a little crooked after a long shift. Tiny imperfections creep in like dust under a door. And once dust settles somewhere long enough, it starts to belong there. He was never one to stand at the table hoping for red. No, he watched quietly. He recorded numbers, hundreds of them, then thousands, tens of thousands by some accounts. He hired assistants, students, friends, who looked like ordinary gamblers killing time. They tracked spins with the patience of botanists cataloging leaves, clipboards hidden under newspapers, notes scribbled in tiny handwriting. It wasn't glamorous work. It was clerical, repetitive, almost dull. Most obsessions are. When he later headed to San Remo, the wheel began to talk. Over weeks of observation, Jarecki noticed certain numbers landing more often than they ought to. Not dramatically more, just enough. Enough to lean the long arc of probability ever so slightly in his favor. Now here's the part folks tend to misunderstand. He didn't predict the next spin. He didn't wave his hands over the felt. He didn't chase streaks. He waited for an advantage the way a surgeon waits for the right moment to cut. And when he believed the math leaned his way, he bet, calmly, firmly, without theatrics. The casino staff noticed him the way you notice a man who doesn't blink much. At first they assumed variance. Every house has to endure the occasional winner. It's good for business, makes the illusion feel democratic. But Jarecki kept winning. Not wildly, not recklessly, systematically. And casinos can forgive luck. They can forgive noise. What they struggle to forgive is pattern. Pattern suggests the house is mortal. And once that suspicion takes root in a marble room, it spreads slow and cold. Over time, he extracted millions of dollars from European casinos, including more than $1.2 million from San Remo alone in a single stretch during the late 1960s, which is the kind of figure that makes management call meetings behind closed doors and lower their voices. The wheel, it seemed, had a flaw. A tiny imbalance in its construction caused certain sectors to favor particular numbers. Nothing visible to the naked eye, nothing dramatic, just a whisper of bias. Richard listened. And when a man keeps listening and keeps cashing, people start listening back. You may be shocked, but even back then, word traveled fast in gambling circles. Faster than gossip in a small-town barbershop. Soon enough, other players caught wind of what he was doing. A few tried to imitate him. Most failed. Patience isn't fashionable. Discipline is even less so. Casinos grew suspicious. They examined wheels. They replaced parts. They shifted frets, those small metal dividers between numbers. They tried to erase the ghost in the machine. Some even quietly retired entire wheels after he left town. Jarecki adapted. He moved from casino to casino, Monte Carlo, San Remo, Divonne-les-Bains. Each new room required fresh data, fresh observation, weeks of quiet presence before placing serious money on the felt. Imagine the nerve to sit in a gilded hall, surrounded by wealth and history, knowing that every spin might tilt slightly your way, but only if you've counted correctly. There's a photograph of him somewhere from that era. He looks almost amused, as if the whole affair were a private joke between him and the laws of physics. But unlike you and me, the casinos didn't find it funny. They barred him eventually, some quietly, some less so. In certain places, they modified wheels entirely, redesigning them to eliminate the kind of bias he exploited. He never cheated. That part matters. He didn't tamper with equipment, didn't bribe dealers, didn't slip magnets into pockets like some carnival villain. He simply observed imperfections that the house preferred not to acknowledge. In polite company, they call that advantage play. In less polite rooms, they call it something else. Winning too consistently has a way of making people uncomfortable. I've always found it curious how casinos advertise randomness as sacred right up until someone measures it. Jarecki measured. He treated roulette wheels the way a cardiologist treats a heart murmur. Listen long enough and you can hear the irregular beat. But obsession has a cost. Tracking thousands of spins isn't romantic. It's lonely work. You're surrounded by noise, chips clacking, glasses clinking, laughter rising and falling, and you're scribbling numbers like a bookkeeper. Friends described him as intense, brilliant, certainly, competitive. There's something about bending probability that does things to a man's posture. He wasn't reckless with his winnings. He invested, lived comfortably, moved between continents. Germany and the United States became twin anchors in his life, but he never quite stepped away from the wheel. Years later, he returned to Germany and built a business importing high-end cars, Ferraris, Maseratis, the sort of machines engineered with precision down to the millimeter. That detail feels appropriate. Precision had always been his ally. Casinos had modernized by then. Wheels improved. Quality control tightened. Surveillance sharpened. The soft flaws of the mid-century era grew harder to find. The edge, once visible to those who looked long enough, became thinner, like a trail walked too many times. And maybe that's fitting. Every golden age closes quietly, doesn't slam the door, just eases it shut. Nowadays, there's a temptation to frame men like Richard Jarecki as rebels. I don't think that fits. He wasn't raging against the house, but instead studying it, the way a scientist studies a specimen under a microscope, detached, curious, focused. He understood something fundamental about systems. Perfection is expensive. And in the mid-20th century, roulette wheels weren't perfect. Small manufacturing deviations, subtle warping over time, frets that leaned a fraction of a degree too far. Most players blamed fate for their losses. He blamed metallurgy. That alone sets a man apart. I imagine the moment when a wheel first betrayed itself to him. Perhaps a late evening in San Remo. Cigarette smoke drifting lazily, the croupier's voice measured and calm. Rien ne va plus. The ball dances, the wheel hums. It drops into a pocket he's been watching for weeks. And instead of cheering, he nods, just once, like a man confirming a diagnosis he made days ago. There's a particular satisfaction in being right about something that everyone else insists is random. But there's danger in it too. Because once you begin to believe systems can be decoded, you start looking for flaws everywhere. In markets, in institutions, in people. The world becomes a series of wheels spinning. Casinos eventually redesign their equipment in response to players like him. Balanced wheels with greater precision, regular inspections, standardized manufacturing. The romance of imperfect machinery faded, and with it, the window he had climbed through. He aged, as we all do, lived long enough to see his story turn into gambling folklore, articles written, forums buzzing, half the tales exaggerated, half understated. Some might even call him a legend of the felt. I certainly do. He died in 2018, 90 years old. A long life for a man who danced around probability. But unlike other gambling figures I've covered, when I think about Richard Jarecki, I don't picture stacks of chips. I picture a notebook, page after page of numbers written carefully in ink. A man in a quiet suit sitting slightly apart from the crowd, watching the wheel spin with a doctor's detachment. the way an old country physician watches a patient breathe, waiting for the rhythm to betray itself. No shouting, no superstition, just observation, just patience stretched thin as fishing line. Most gamblers chase the feeling of control. He chased evidence of it. There's a difference, a subtle one, but important. One is emotional, the other is clinical. One is a hunch, the other keeps receipts. The spectacle didn't seduce him, and for a season, a rare, fragile season, the wheel yielded. Not forever, just long enough. That's why you won't find monuments to him in Monte Carlo. No plaque beside the table saying, "Here sat the doctor who listened too closely." Casinos don't celebrate the men who expose their seams, but the seams were there, and for a while they sang, softly, just loud enough for a patient man to hear. Maybe that's the lesson, though I hesitate to call it that. Not everything needs polishing into wisdom. Some stories are better left with a little dust on them. A man trained to diagnose human flaws decided to diagnose mechanical ones instead. He found a heartbeat where others heard noise, and he walked away with fortunes carved from imperfection. Now it's harder. The wheels spin smoother. Some folks sit at home and tap a screen, playing virtual roulette where the only thing humming is a server farm somewhere in the dark. No cigarette smoke, no chandeliers, no pit boss pretending not to stare. And if you still hop over to Atlantic City or Vegas for a weekend, the manufacturing tolerances are tighter than ever. Surveillance sharper than a hawk's eye. They measure the measurers now. The house has learned. It always does. But I can't help admiring the quiet audacity of a doctor sitting beneath crystal chandeliers, listening to steel and wood the way he once listened to lungs. Listening the way some men listen to sermons, hoping to catch the one line everyone else missed. There's something almost poetic about that. The idea that randomness, under enough scrutiny, reveals its fingerprints. Not forever, just long enough. And sometimes that's all a patient man needs, just a sliver of daylight under the door. The wheel still spins in Europe tonight, somewhere in Monte Carlo, beneath chandeliers that have seen empires rise and fall. A ball rattles around its track. Most folks at the table are hoping. One or two might be counting. And if you listen closely, past the clink of chips and the soft murmur of French, you might hear the faintest echo of a doctor's pen scratching paper, measuring, waiting, taking notes like Sunday service just started, knowing that perfection in this world is always just a little bit out of balance. And that's where the story lives. Right there in the wobble.